The Canadian government just today announced new sanctions related to Israel. Well, kind of related to Israel. I'm a journalist and I have been pressing the government over the last little while about what concrete action they're taking in response to the genocide in Gaza, which has been determined to be a genocide by several international human rights organizations. When on Sunday night the Madleen was intercepted by Israel on international waters, something that was likely illegal under international law, unless Israel's actions fully meet the international legal requirements for enforcing a blockade during wartime. And one of those 5 legal conditions includes that it must not stop the delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians. So pretty sure this was illegal. So that night I reached out to the Department of Foreign Affairs to ask them if they're going to do anything about this. Because if, as Mark Carney said in French, Friday wasn't the day for sanctions, was that day now? I also reached out to Mark Carney's office directly, who passed my request on to Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Annan's team. And this morning, I opened my email and the Foreign Affairs Department still hadn't sent me a statement in response to my actual questions, but they had sent me a link. And it led to a brand new press release announcing the following: that Canada is sanctioning 2 far-right Israeli cabinet ministers for, quote, inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. Specifically, Canada is sanctioning 2 far-right Israeli cabinet ministers in Benjamin Netanyahu's government, but not Netanyahu himself, and these guys are now inadmissible to Canada and they can't do business in Canada or with Canadians at home or abroad. And this was a joint announcement with the UK, Norway, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, this is the 4th round of sanctions that Canada has imposed on what the government describes as, quote, facilitators of extremist settler violence against civilians in the West Bank. This is an incredibly serious issue, so I'm glad to see the government taking action here. But I do want to highlight that extremists in the West Bank are not the only ones responsible for violence in the area. The West Bank is where the IDF killed Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in a clearly marked press vest. It's also where the IDF shot at an international delegation of diplomats. Shot near them. And if the IDF behaves with this degree of impunity towards press and towards international civilians, can you imagine how the IDF treats Palestinians in the West Bank? Yeah, it's like this. To diminish this kind of state-sanctioned violence as coming from extremists downplays the very real responsibility that lies with the entirety of the Israeli government, which continues to expand its illegal settlements in the West Bank. Yet, in announcing the sanctions and despite acknowledging the impact of settler violence on Palestinian civilians, Canada and the other countries were careful to emphasize that these sanctions are limited to the 2 far-right government ministers, who the statement describes as individuals who have been, quote, inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. Quote, today's measures are targeted towards individuals who, in our view, undermine Israel's own security and its standing in the world. I also feel like with this statement, there's something pretty big missing, right? Yeah, the sanctions aren't about any specific conduct in Gaza. The only thing it does is it states that the sanctions, quote, cannot be seen in isolation from the catastrophe in Gaza. And then they wrote some words. But starving Palestinians in Gaza can't eat words. Words won't shield them from bombs. And words turn to ash when you consider that Canada still has a role in the supply chain of weapons that end up bombing these Palestinian civilians. Nonetheless, here's what those words were. Quote, we continue to be appalled by the immense suffering of civilians, including the denial of essential aid. There must be no unlawful transfer of Palestinians from Gaza or within the West Bank, nor any reduction in the territory of the Gaza Strip. We will continue to work with the Israeli government and a range of partners. We will strive to ensure an immediate ceasefire, the release now of the remaining hostages, and for the unhindered flow of humanitarian aid, including food. We want to see a reconstructed Gaza, no longer run by Hamas, and a political pathway to a 2-state solution. And they only acknowledged that after mentioning October 7th again, which was an awful thing, but it is now being weaponized by the Israeli government to justify everything since. So to prioritize mentioning October 7th before you mention Gaza, where a genocide is happening right now, That's a choice. As a part of this big news release, the Foreign Affairs Minister also gave us a quote. She said, "With today's sanctions, we are sending a clear message that the continued expansion of settlements and acts of extremist settler violence in the West Bank are unacceptable and pose serious obstacles to peace and the realization of a two-state solution. We resolutely stand with the Israeli and Palestinian peoples and their right to live in peace and security with dignity and without fear." Yes, because the Israeli and Palestinian peoples are facing equal threats to living in that way right now. I mean, come on. Meanwhile, just yesterday, 412 prominent professors, lawyers, academics, civil society members, faith and labor leaders, former ministers, diplomats, and public servants came out with this open letter directed to Mark Carney, demanding 5 specific areas of concrete action from the government on Gaza, including pushing for a ceasefire, the release of all Israeli and Palestinian captives, because there are Palestinian ones too, humanitarian access to Gaza, compliance with international courts, the pursuit of all domestic measures, including sanctions, and the withdrawal of trade agreements that we still have with Israel. It also calls for the recognition of the state of Palestine. And they aren't the only ones putting the pressure on the government to really take action to tackle this genocide. Today in the National Press Theater that's right across from Parliament Hill, we heard from people who are heading to join a massive march to the Rafah border crossing in order to break Israel's siege. At that press conference, they were joined by several NDP MPs, the Green MP, and a Liberal MP. And once again, we heard an impassioned speaker beg our government to really do something.
Why these people doesn't matter to the Western countries? Why we are talking about values? We are giving lessons to others. You know, when we are not capable to listen, the families of those people that are also living here, asking for support.
I'm still waiting for a response from Minister Annan's office about the Madleen and about this open letter from 412 people, and I will update you when I get it. Until then, what do you think of all this?